The Grand Lux Hotel was the crown jewel of the city, a shimmering tower of glass and gold where the world's elite gathered. Its lobby echoed with the clink of champagne glasses and the murmur of diplomats, businessmen, and celebrities. But beneath the glittering chandeliers, unnoticed by the guests, Elena moved silently. Her navy uniform blended into the background as she pushed her cart, wiping fingerprints off marble surfaces and mopping spills with practiced efficiency. Her eyes, sharp but weary, flickered occasionally to the conversations around her. A French couple arguing about dinner reservations, a Japanese investor speaking rapid-fire into his phone, a group of Spanish tourists laughing over a map. She understood every word. But no one noticed her. No one ever did. That changed the day Richard Langston walked in. The CEO of Grand Lux Holdings was a legend himself. Tall, silver-haired, and radiating authority. He didn't announce his visits. He preferred to see the hotel as it really was. As he strode through the lobby, managers scrambled, adjusting ties and whispering warnings into radios. Richard's sharp gaze missed nothing. The wilted flower arrangement, the slow check-in line, the faint smudge on the concierge desk. But then his steps faltered. A commotion near the fountain caught his attention. A distraught woman in a hijab was gesturing wildly at the front desk, her Arabic frantic. The clerk, a young man named Jake, was red-faced, stammering, I don't understand." Nearby, an ambassador in a tailored suit frowned, clearly irritated by the delay. Just as Richard moved to intervene, a soft voice cut through the chaos. Elena stepped forward, her mop abandoned. She spoke to the woman in fluent Arabic, her tone calming. The woman clutched Elena's arm, relief flooding her face. Then, without missing a beat, Elena turned to the ambassador and translated the issue. A lost passport, a missed flight, her words smooth and precise. The ambassador nodded, impressed, and barked an order to his aide. Richard watched, stunned. The janitor, had just diffused a diplomatic incident in 3 languages. And as he listened, he realized with growing shock, she wasn't done. A German couple approached, looking lost. Elena switched effortlessly to German, directing them to the spa. Then, a Mandarin-speaking businessman, his phone dead. Elena handed him a charger, her Mandarin flawless. Richard's pulse quickened. Who was this woman? Richard couldn't tear his eyes away from Elena as she seamlessly transitioned between languages, her voice calm and assured, her posture unassuming, yet radiating an unexpected authority. The way she carried herself, humble yet confident, unnoticed yet indispensable, left him with a gnawing curiosity. He had spent decades in the corporate world, surrounded by Ivy League graduates and polished executives. Yet here was a woman in a janitor's uniform outshining them all without even trying. As the relieved guests dispersed, Elena returned too, her cart, her moment in the spotlight over as quickly as it had begun. But Richard wasn't ready to let it end there. He strode toward her, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor, his mind racing with questions. When he reached her, she didn't look up at first, her hands busy wringing out a cloth, her shoulders tense as if bracing for reprimand. "Excuse me," Richard said, his voice low but firm. Elena's hands stilled, and she finally met his gaze. Dark eyes filled with quiet intelligence, a flicker of wariness behind them. "Do you speak Arabic?" he asked, testing her. Without hesitation, she replied in flawless Arabic, her accent native, her phrasing elegant. Richard's eyebrows rose. "And Mandarin?" he pressed. Again she answered effortlessly, her tone smooth as silk. "French," she responded without missing a beat. "Spanish? Russian? German?" Each time her replies were perfect, her fluency undeniable. Richard felt a strange mix of awe and frustration. How had someone like her been invisible in his own hotel? The lobby buzzed around them, guests milling about, staff darting glances in their direction. But for Richard, the world had narrowed to this single moment, this woman who defied every assumption. "Who are you?" he finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena hesitated, her fingers tightening around the cloth in her hands. "Just a cleaner, sir," she said softly. But Richard shook his head. "No," he said. "No one just speaks 7 languages like that. Where did you learn them?" For the first time, Elena's composure wavered. She glanced around, as if afraid someone might overhear, then exhaled slowly, her shoulders slumping slightly under the weight of a story she had clearly buried long ago. "It's complicated," she murmured. Richard studied her face, the faint lines of exhaustion, the quiet dignity in her posture, the unspoken resilience in her eyes. This wasn't just a janitor. This was someone who had lived a life far beyond these walls, and he needed to know more. "Come with me," he said abruptly, gesturing toward the elevators. Elena's eyes widened. "Sir, I still have my shift." "Consider it handled," Richard interrupted, already signaling to a passing manager. "We need to talk." The elevator doors closed behind them, sealing Richard and Elena in a tense silence as the numbers climbed toward the executive floors. Elena stood stiffly, her hands clasped in front of her, her gaze fixed on the polished doors as if they might offer an escape. Richard studied her reflection in the metal, the way her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the way her fingers twisted the fabric of her uniform, the quiet dread in her posture. He had interrogated CEOs and negotiated with billionaires, but this unassuming woman was an enigma he couldn't unravel. "You're not in trouble," he said finally, softening his tone. "I just want to understand." Elena let out a slow breath but didn't respond. The elevator dinged, and the doors slid open to reveal the hushed luxury of the executive lounge. Plush carpets, floor-to-ceiling windows, the distant hum of the city far below. Richard led her to a secluded corner table, gesturing for her to sit. She hesitated, glancing at the pristine upholstery, then at her own worn shoes, as if afraid to dirty the furniture. "Please," Richard insisted, pulling out the chair for her. Reluctantly, she sat, her back straight, her hands folded tightly in her lap. A waiter approached, but Richard dismissed him with a wave. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Richard leaned forward, his voice low. "You were a professor, weren't you?" The question hung in the air like a detonated bomb. Elena's eyes flickered, surprise, then fear, then resignation. She didn't answer, but the way her throat moved told him everything. "I've met enough academics to recognize one," Richard continued. "The precision of your speech, the way you switch between languages. It's not just fluency, it's pedagogy." Elena's fingers trembled slightly before she stilled them. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. It was a long time ago. Richard pressed further. "Where?" She shook her head, a barely there movement. "It doesn't matter." "It does," Richard countered. "Because right now, you're cleaning floors when you should be running departments. That's not just a waste, it's a crime." Elena's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes glistening with something unspoken. Grief, maybe, or shame. Then, in a whisper, she said, "My credentials don't exist here." Richard frowned. "What do you mean?" She looked away, out the window at the sprawling city below. "In my country, I had a name, a reputation. But when the war came, the universities burned, the records with them. By the time I arrived here, I was no one, just another immigrant with no papers, no proof of who I was." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she swallowed hard. Richard's chest tightened. He had heard stories like this before. Refugees stripped of their pasts, forced into survival. But hearing it from her, seeing the raw pain in her eyes, made it real in a way he couldn't ignore. "And your family?" he asked gently. Elena's Composure shattered for just a second, a flash of anguish before she schooled her features back into calm. "My son is all I have left," she said quietly. "This job pays for his school. That's all that matters now." Richard sat back, stunned. The pieces fell into place. Her humility, her silence, the way she endured invisibility without complaint. She wasn't just hiding her past, she was sacrificing it for someone else's future. The weight of that truth settled over him, heavy and humbling. For the first time in years, Richard Langston, the unshakable CEO, felt something unfamiliar, a burning need to make things right. The silence between them stretched, thick with unspoken words, as Richard processed Elena's story. The war-torn past, the erased identity, the quiet desperation of a mother fighting for her child in a foreign land. His mind raced with possibilities, each more urgent than the last. Here was a woman who could command a room in 7 languages, who had once shaped minds as a professor, now reduced to scrubbing toilets because bureaucracy had failed her. The injustice of it burned in his chest. Leaning forward, his voice low but charged with intensity, Richard said, "Elena, I want to offer you a job." Her eyes snapped to his, wary, as if waiting for the punchline of a cruel joke. "Not charity," he clarified. "A real position, head of international client relations. Your language skills, your diplomatic instincts, they're exactly what this company needs." Elena's breath hitched, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. "You don't even know me," she whispered. "I know enough," Richard countered. "I saw you handle that ambassador like a seasoned diplomat. I heard you reassure that tourist in her native tongue when no one else could. That's not just skill, that's gift." He pushed a glass of water toward her, noticing how her hands shook as she reached for it. "The pay would be triple what you earn now," he added quietly. "Enough to give your son more than just survival." Elena's throat worked as she swallowed. Hard, her gaze dropping to her lap where a small faded photo peeked from her uniform pocket, a boy with her same dark eyes, grinning in a school uniform. Richard glimpsed it before she tucked it away hastily, as if ashamed to reveal even that much vulnerability. "Why?" she asked suddenly, her voice raw. "Why would you do this?" The question hung between them, heavy with the weight of her mistrust. Richard hesitated, then chose honesty. "Because talent like yours shouldn't be buried," he said, "and because I've spent too many years valuing titles over people. Today, I'd like to start fixing that." Outside, the sun dipped below the skyline, casting long shadows across the room. Somewhere in the building, a phone rang, a door slammed, life moved on, but here, in this quiet corner, the world seemed to hold its breath. Elena closed her eyes for a long moment, as if steeling herself against hope. When she opened them, there was a new resolve in her gaze. "If I say yes," she began slowly, "there will be talk. The janitor promoted overnight? They'll say it's pity, or worse." Richard smirked, a rare, genuine expression. "Let them talk. By the time you're done, they'll be too busy applauding to remember their prejudice." He stood, extending a hand. "One condition, though." Elena tensed. "What?" "You'll need to teach me Arabic," he said, deadpan. "I've been faking it with investors for years." A startled laugh escaped her, bright, unexpected, like sunlight breaking through storm. Clouds. For the first time, Richard saw the woman she must have been before the war, vibrant, quick-witted, alive. Then, just as quickly, she sobered, her fingers brushing the photo in her pocket once more before she reached out and took his hand. Her grip was firm, calloused from labor but steady with newfound determination. "Deal," she said. The next morning, whispers slithered through the Grand Lux Hotel like a live current, leaping from housekeepers to bellhops, from concierges to managers. "Did you hear? The janitor is being moved to the executive floor." By mid-morning, the rumor had mutated into a dozen outlandish versions. She's the CEO's secret relative. She blackmailed him. She's a spy. In the staff break room, a cluster of employees huddled over stale coffee, their voices sharp with disbelief. "It's a prank," sneered Derek from accounting, adjusting his tie. "Next thing you know, they'll make the dishwasher's VP." Nearby, Sarah, a front desk supervisor, frowned. "I've seen her, Elena. She's always reading during breaks. Books in, like, 5 languages." Derek rolled his eyes. "Big deal. I took Spanish in high school, too." The laughter that followed was brittle, edged with unease. Meanwhile, on the 30th floor, Elena stood frozen outside the glass doors of the executive suite, her reflection staring back. A woman in a thrift store. Blazer, her hair pulled tight, her shoes polished to a desperate shine. The outfit had cost her a week's groceries, but now, under the fluorescent lights, she felt like a child playing dress-up. Behind her, Richard cleared his throat. "Nervous?" She didn't trust herself to speak, so she nodded. He surprised her by stepping closer, his voice dropping. "First time I presented to the board, I vomited in a potted plant." Elena blinked. "You're lying." Richard grinned. "Ask HR. They still call it the incident." The tension in her shoulders eased a fraction. Taking a deep breath, she pushed through the doors, and the room fell silent. 20 faces swiveled toward her. Vice presidents in tailored suits, directors with sharp-eyed scrutiny, assistants hiding smirks behind tablets. At the head of the table, the COO, Margaret Voss, arched a perfectly groomed eyebrow. "Richard," she said coolly, "care to explain why we're hosting maintenance staff?" The air turned to ice. Richard didn't flinch. "Margaret, meet Elena Morales, our new head of international client relations." A beat of stunned silence. Then chaos erupted. "You can't be serious. What are her qualifications? This is a joke, right?" Elena's pulse roared in her ears, but then she caught sight of her own trembling hands, hands that had scrubbed floors, soothed crying guests, held her son through nightmares. "These people don't know you," she reminded herself, "but you know the world better than they ever will." Straightening, she turned to the loudest critic, a silver-haired man spluttering about protocol. Without missing a beat, she addressed him in rapid-fire German. The man's jaw dropped. She pivoted to Margaret, switching to French, her tone polite but firm. Then, in flawless English, she said, "Gentlemen, my resume is written in the 7 languages I speak fluently, the 12 countries I've lived in, and the 1,000 nights I've spent making sure your guests felt welcome while you slept. If that's not qualifications, perhaps you'd prefer I demonstrate by fixing the Wi-Fi in Mandarin?" A stunned hush. Then, from the back, a snort of laughter. The tension shattered. Even Margaret's lips twitched. Richard hid a smile. Game on. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of quiet revolutions. Elena's office, once a storage closet hastily converted, became Grand Lux's best-kept secret. Diplomats requested her by name. VIPs sent thank-you notes praising her miraculous ability to resolve disputes before they escalated. Yet the real transformation wasn't in the boardroom, it was in the staff cafeteria, where housekeepers now sat with marketers, where Elena could be found every Thursday helping the dishwasher's son with his French homework. But not everyone celebrated. Derek from accounting lurked in hallways muttering about affirmative action. One rainy afternoon, he cornered Elena by the copy room. "Must be nice," he hissed, "sleeping your way to the top." Elena went very still. Then, with eerie calm, she replied in Arabic, "El karama la tuber." Dignity is not for sale. Derek flushed, uncomprehending but unnerved. The encounter left her shaken, until the next morning, when an envelope landed on her desk. Inside, a single keycard and a note. "Penthouse Suite, 1201. For you and your son. No arguments. Elena's breath caught. Suite 1201 was the hotel's most coveted residence. All soft carpets and skyline views, far from the leaky apartment she shared with Javier. That evening she stood in its doorway, her son's small hand clutching hers. "Mama," he whispered, eyes wide, "is this real?" She knelt, brushing his hair back. "Yes, mi corazón. But remember—" Her voice faltered as she spotted the bookshelf. Richard had stocked linguistics journals, Spanish classics, a brand new laptop. Javier was already racing toward the window, laughing as the city lights blinked to life below. Elena pressed a hand to her mouth, tears burning. Downstairs, in his office, Richard watched the security feed, just long enough to see her smile, before shutting it off with a quiet nod. The Grand Lux's annual gala was its crown jewel, a night of champagne towers and whispered deals under crystal chandeliers. This year, the buzz wasn't about the celebrity guests or the caviar, it was about her. Elena stood at the podium, resplendent in emerald silk, her voice steady as she welcomed delegates in 5 languages. The crowd erupted in applause, but the real moment came later. As the orchestra swelled, Richard took the stage. "A year ago," he began, "I learned that excellence doesn't wear a tie. Sometimes it carries a mop." Laughter rippled through the room. Then, to everyone's shock, he stepped aside, gesturing to Elena. "Which is why, tonight, I'm announcing Grand Lux's new Horizon Initiative. Full scholarships for immigrant staff to pursue degrees, no matter their title." The room exploded in cheers, but Elena's gaze was fixed on the very back, where Javier stood beside Maria, the 60-year-old laundress who'd once confided her dream of becoming a nurse. Maria was sobbing into her hands. Afterward, as guests mobbed Elena with business cards and compliments, she slipped away to the terrace. Richard found her there, staring at the stars. "You okay?" he asked. She smiled. "Just remembering the first time we met. You thought I was a spy." He chuckled. "Turns out you were." A comfortable silence settled between them. Below, the city glittered. 1,000 lives, 1,000 hidden stories. Somewhere in the crowd, Javier was teaching the bartender's daughter Portuguese. Somewhere, Maria was hugging her scholarship letter. And Elena? She was no longer just the janitor, the professor, the survivor. She was proof that greatness could be found in the most unexpected places, if someone bothered to look.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.